There's much more in life than you know that you don't control, and you need to let go of all that stuff you don't control. But there's this one thing in life that you do control that you're not paying attention to, which is your internal compass, your internal reactions to events. Focus not on events, but your reactions to events. And hey, that's the one thing you can always control.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis podcast with Chip Conley, where we explore how midlife isn't a crisis, but a chrysalis, a time of profound transformation that can lead to the most meaningful chapter of your life.
This is Chip Conley. Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis. And I was really excited about Eric Weiner, who has said yes to me and to both do a workshop with me in Santa Fe, April 9th through the 12th, but also to come onto the podcast because he's one of my favorite writers. He is like an investigative journalist who is a guinea pig. He throws himself into learning about philosophy, and he goes around the world studying, ancient philosophers. He goes out and learns all the different religions in the world and tries to taste test those. He does the same for happiness in terms of the happiest places in the world. Why are they happy? Or the places that are the most creative or have the most creative geniuses. So he's sort of like one of the most interesting people in the world because he throws himself with wild abandon into every book that he writes. And his books are very humorous and full of curiosity and vulnerability. So I think you're going to enjoy this one. This is one of my favorite episodes we've had on the Midlife Chrysalis. Eric, welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis.
Thank you, Chip. I am delighted to be here.
So one of the things I love about your writing, and you are one of my favorite writers, is you sort of put yourself out there both with humility and humor to be like the test case. Like, I'm going to go and learn about God. I'm going to go learn about bliss. I'm going to go learn about philosophy. And then you go and do your research and you're a compelling writer, but you're also like almost like an investigative reporter of yourself. Where did that all come from? Where did that come from?
I guess from my father, who was a doctor, who used a bunch of big jargon all the time. And you never had a bruise with him. You always had a hematoma or a contusion. Nothing was ever simple. And I guess I developed this kind of allergy to jargon and to overly erudite writing. I don't like it. I think jargon, and I use that term broadly, any language that's used to exclude your reader, from your little club, I don't like. I like writing that is clear, that is simplified without being oversimplified. And I think the first task of a writer, I think, is to be curious, but the second task of a writer is to be vulnerable, in my mind. And so I do try to make myself vulnerable. Partly, yeah, for laughs, because I think, that gets people in the door, but that's just part of it. I think the reader has to be able to see themselves in your shoes. And if you're this high and mighty expert, another word I don't like the word expert. I think it's kind of a dead thing, being an expert. But if you're this high and mighty expert, the reader's not going to relate to you. And if you have lessons to impart, they're probably not going to be imparted because the reader's going to be too intimidated. So I try early in my books to sort of say, look, I'm just a schlub like you, who happen to have spent, say, the past 4 years studying about the science of happiness or about creative genius or about philosophy or Ben Franklin or whatever it is. So that's really what distinguishes me from my reader, is that I have the time and energy and inclination to dive really deep into these subjects and then to relay what I've learned to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And it's sort of surprising that there aren't more authors who do what you do because it's very compelling. I just want to read some of the titles of some of your books because they're so good. Part of the way I got introduced to you was originally the Geography of Bliss, One Grump's Search for the Happiest Places in the World. There's Man Seeks God, My Flirtations with the Divine, The Geography of Genius. What is that? A search for the world's most creative places from ancient Athens to Silicon Valley, Ben and Me in Search of a Founder's Formula for a Long and Useful Life. And then the one that really is we're gonna spend most of our time talking about today, the Socrates Express, in search of life lessons from dead philosophers. Do you name your books, or do you have, like, an amazing editor or someone else who does that for you?
I've named each and every one of my books. In fact, yeah. I don't know if that's always the case with writers, but, I have named, each and every one, because for me, the title kind of matters. I know some writers won't come up with the title till they've, submitted a manuscript, but for me, the title and subtitle sort of frames the book in my mind. So, I'm big on framing devices. I think it's how we get through life by, framing subjects we're about to tackle.
Looking at each of these books, I think first of all, in a past life, I think you were a madman. You have the you're very you have the ability to turn a phrase and capture an idea with a sense of humor. I wanna just talk for a couple minutes about the Geography of Bliss, because that was a book that really resonated with me. Talk about that experience, about going around the world searching for the happy places and finding that some of the happiest places weren't that happy.
Let me give you the backstory, which won't take too long. Just bear with me of how this book came to be. So I, in a former life, was a foreign correspondent for NPR, and it was a great job. It was the almost perfect job for me, but not the perfect job. And I was living abroad, covering Iraq, Afghanistan, all these important stories, but something didn't quite feel right, and that something was that there was this burden of negativity, this cloud of negativity, really, that hung over almost all my stories. And so I woke up one day with this light bulb moment. I thought, well, what if instead of going to all these war zones and places of disaster, I spent a year traveling the world looking for the happiest places and the happiest people? What could they teach us? And then I had a second light bulb. It was like one of those double light bulb things, where I thought, well, what if I got NPR to pay me to go around the world for a year doing this? So I presented the idea to my foreign editor, and he said, in so many words, "What have you been smoking?" And this is back before smoking such things was legal. And so I thought, okay, this is a book. But I was motivated to look for the bright spots in the world. And I mention this because it really has informed all my books and my break from Eric the journalist to Eric the author. There was an amazing man I met who unfortunately just passed away at the way too young age of 55, an Irish writer named Machan Megan, who wrote about Celtic philosophy and ideas. And I met him in Ireland just a few months ago. And he described himself as a gatherer of light. And I thought, oh, I like that, a gatherer of light. So that is what I try to do in all my books, starting with the Geography of Bliss, looking, sort of willfully, purposefully ignoring all the crap in the world, all the bad stuff happening, and God knows there's enough of it, and focusing on, say, the people of Iceland, where I spent some time in the middle of winter. What can they teach us about happiness? The people of Switzerland or Bhutan or India, looking for treating the world as a laboratory of ideas, but of good ideas, not of diseased ideas, a sort of happy petri dish, if you will. So yeah, I did a lot of book research into the science of happiness, which I know you know a lot about, and you probably have had guests on talking
Yep,
about that.
yep.
But I combine that with on the ground travel log, experiencing these places, and I combine that with, as you alluded to in the beginning, with that personal, let me try this on. The Icelandic people say that, you should try rotten shark to be happy. I'll try rotten shark. Spoiler alert, did not make me happy. Or whatever it is. That's not the best example, but in other words, to road test some of these ideas as well. So it was sort of kind of a three-part book that I tried to weave together. I'm happy with the results, and Rainn Wilson was happy enough with the results to do the TV version of it, which aired just a couple years ago on NBC Peacock. Rainn Wilson in the Geography of Bliss, as it turns out, Rainn Wilson is a recovering grump just like me.
Well,
So there
Rainn
you go.
Wilson has been on this podcast, so that's,
There you go. Worlds colliding.
the world's
Worlds
colliding,
colliding.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so, Mr. Grumpy, which of
Yes.
those places that you went to, which is the one that you had the greatest affection for?
And it's like, who's your favorite child? And I'm not gonna say all of them because that's a lame answer. I'm as much as I love Iceland and Bhutan, I'm gonna say India because I introduce actually in my most recent book, Ben and Me, I introduce this idea of a soul place, which is not exactly a happy place, but it's close. So my the notion of a soul place in my mind is just as we have a soulmate out there, the person who we're meant to be with, who brings out the best in us. Doesn't mean we get along 100% of the time, but they're the person we're meant to be with. I think we also have a soul place, that place where we self-actualize, where we blossom. And, for just to name a historical figure, I just spent a lot of time with Ben Franklin. Franklin was born in Boston, but that was not his soul place. Philadelphia was, where he escaped to, ran away at age 17. And for me, it was India, which is not necessarily one of the happiest places in the world, but it's probably one of the least boring places. So India, number one, number two, Bhutan, number three, Iceland, I would say.
If you're enjoying the conversations we've been having on the Midlife Chrysalis, I have a valuable offer for you to consider. My book, Learning to Love Midlife 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, is a national bestseller. And right now, you can get a copy for just the cost of shipping. It offers stories, research, and practices to help you move from a midlife crisis to a midlife catalyst and see this stage of life not as a decline, but an opportunity to flourish. Claim your copy today at meawisdom.com/midlife book. So let's talk about Ben Franklin for a moment, just because, as you know, MEA, and you and I are going to be teaching a workshop in early April. We'll talk about that a little bit later at our Santa Fe campus. We're a wisdom school, whatever a midlife wisdom school is. That's what we are. Well, Ben Franklin is certainly known for his wisdom and his quips. He was a quippy madman before, madmen existed. What in studying him and writing about him, what most impressed you about Ben Franklin?
A couple things. Number one, his optimism, or I would even call it hopefulness. I would make a distinction between being hopeful and being optimistic. I think to say you're optimistic means you're kind of wishing that things will work out. But I think being hopeful, you're actively involved in making it work out, and that was Franklin. The neuroscientist Dave Eagleton, if you haven't had him on the podcast, you should. He coined this phrase of a possibilian, which is a great term, and I think Ben Franklin was a possibilian. He saw the possibilities. He's sitting there in the 1700s imagining air travel and imagining air warfare too. He kind of got both right. But he always cast his gaze into the future. So even when things were dark and dreary and he was being hunted by the British and he had a really difficult relationship with his son, to put it mildly, he writes to his sister Jane and says, all in all, I have to say it's a pretty good sort of a world. And I read that, I'm like, "Yeah, you go, Ben." This is a time before cell phones, before antibiotics, all the quote unquote good stuff. And he's like, "Overall, all in all, it's a pretty good sort of a world." So number one is optimism. Number two, I would say, is usefulness, his emphasis on being useful, which I have to admit is not a concept that has really resonated with me until recently. I think as you get older, you start to begin your sentences with the phrase "as you get older," which is something young people don't do, but, as you get older, you start to say that. I think you do start to focus on this idea of usefulness, of being useful for its own sake. So Franklin's inventions, the lightning rod, bifocals, flexible catheter. Not many people know he invented the flexible catheter.
Oh, I've had that. I've had the experience of that twice in the last
There
few
you go.
years.
You can thank Ben, so
You mean there's such a
always
thing as an inflexible catheter? That sounds painful.
apparently there was, and you don't wanna know about it, okay? So he all these inventions are extremely useful and for everyone, but he also was a social entrepreneur. I don't know if you know this, he invented the matching grant. It was the 1750s in Philadelphia, and they had no real hospital in the colonies, the British American colonies then, and a doctor friend of his was trying to raise money for the hospital, was having absolutely no luck. So he goes to Ben, and Ben goes to the Pennsylvania Assembly and goes to the head of the assembly and says, "Look, Mr. Norris, if I raise $2,000 for the hospital, will the assembly match it?" And the head of the assembly, said, "Sure," thinking that's a lot of money back then. There's no way you're going to raise it. He thought, I get to look generous without having to write a check. Well, Ben raised $2,500 and he had to pony up the money, and the matching grant was invented. So he was very good, as they say in the book, at tricking people into being better versions of themselves, tricking people into being better versions of themselves. And so that prankster part of him that you mentioned was always done in service of something good, kind of a wink and a nod. I tricked you, Mr. Norris, but the result is we now have a hospital. The Pennsylvania Hospital, the first hospital in the US, still functioning today. He was useful in more than just this technical lightning rod, flexible catheter sort of way, but also in a social way. I think if he came back today, he would, he'd be a social entrepreneur as much as he'd be a sort of whiz kid with, with technology.
Okay.
Though he liked technology too, definitely.
Before we get to Socrates Express, I want to talk about two of the other books because I've read both of these as well. Man Seeks God: My Flirtations with the Divine. This may have been your hardest one to write. Maybe I don't know.
I'll tell you this, God is tricky to write about. And it really is. It's, you've got usually 2 camps. You've got the true believers, who just believe, just and nothing's gonna shake their belief, and you have, the atheists who, in a way, believe also, and are not gonna be shaken from their position. I've always found myself in the uncomfortable position of being in between, of being an open-minded skeptic and, being open, to the possibility that life can be otherwise, that there's more to the world than meets the eye. So I went into that book kind of with the same approach I did in Geography of Bliss, but instead of places, it's religions. But of course, I'm going to places. I'm going to Turkey to whirl with the Sufi dervishes. I'm going to Israel for Kabbalah, and I mean, this should be pretty obvious by now. I'm a place person. I really believe that where you are shapes who you are. So I had to go to these places. So I'm trying on some 8, 9, 10 religions and seeing which one fits. With a truly open mind, I think, let me put it this way, like, in my career, I've encountered a lot of weird shit. Can I say that?
You can.
Okay, you're not gonna bleep that. And I feel like there are in general, 2 approaches there have been 2 approaches to a writer encountering weird shit, or an academic or anyone. People eating rotten shark in Iceland, or fried, water bugs in Thailand, which they do. And one is that you're grossed out, you're like, "Whatever, that's just weird. I reject that. That's weird." And then the other is, well, it's sort of the politically correct cultural relativist way. Well, that's their way. They eat rotten shark that's been marinating in urine for 6 months. Okay, that's their way. It's true, true. But my approach is that's weird, quickly followed by, but what do they get out of it? What's there's always a reason. So always asking what do they get out of it? And when you look at religions, there's always a reason. You may not agree with the reason, but there's a reason for the rituals, for the pilgrimages, for all these practices. There's an underlying reason. And I try to acknowledge the weird because I think it's dishonest to ignore that, pretend you don't find it weird, but jump to what do they get out of it. And I guess the third leg of that chair would be, and what can we slash I learn from it? Is anything, is this wisdom importable? Does it convey? So that's my approach to pretty much everything in the world, I would say.
What was it like going to Silicon Valley and to these creative hotspots in the world based upon your book, The Geography of Genius?
Well, Silicon Valley was interesting because it was the last stop on a sort of historical geographic tour, starting in ancient Athens and Renaissance Florence and the Scottish Enlightenment and the Bengal Enlightenment in Renaissance in India, all these places. And then I end up at Silicon Valley, and I have lunch not with a technologist or a venture capitalist, but with an anthropologist whose name escapes me, but who studies Silicon Valley the way an anthropologist would study some tribe in Papua New Guinea. And when you look at it that way, it gets very interesting. And then you see that there are certain ingredients to creative places that Silicon Valley has, but that ancient Athens had as well. I call it the 3 Ds. Some diversity, not just of peoples, but of ideas, hugely important. Discernment, in other words, you've got to separate the good ideas from the bad ones. And in fact, Silicon Valley is pretty good at that. If you have a good idea, they'll fast track it. A bad idea, they'll kill it. So you need these places are colanders as well as magnets. You got to sift. And the third is actually disorder, that you need an element of chaos actually to have breakthroughs. Totally staid, quiet, peaceful places are not creative. As I say in the book, paradise, if it exists, would probably be the least creative place in the world because there's no impetus to create. So, boy, that's really distilling it to a nutshell, but there you go.
Wow. So this has been fun. I mean, honestly, your books are so fascinating and they're amazingly written. So let's talk about the one that we're going to really focus on in the workshop. The workshop we're doing is April 9th through the 12th in Santa Fe. It's called Untapped Wisdom: How Philosophy Changes Your Life. Now, this is based upon the book that you wrote, The Socrates Express: In Search of Life Lessons from Dead Philosophers. So give us the origin story of this book and what you learned from it.
The origin story starts with this gizmo.
Yeah,
Um,
you're holding up your phone.
oh, yes.
Some people are just listening. Yeah.
For those people listening and not watching, I'm holding up an iPhone something, an iThingy, as some people call it, an iThingy. With this device and your device at home, I bet you have one too, you can access pretty much, there we go. Now you're holding up your iThingy. You can access all of human knowledge, information, data. You can find pretty much facts about pretty much everything from the ancient Egyptians and before up until what happened an hour ago. And so it struck me that we are awash in information and data. Never before in human history has it been so easy to acquire information, and I would argue even knowledge. But there is a huge difference between knowledge. Well, knowledge, I would say, is more organized information slash data, but there's a huge leap, even a bigger leap from knowledge to wisdom. There was a British musician who said the difference is that, knowledge is knowing that the tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it into fruit salad. So,
Oh, and
so
philosophy? Philosophy is wondering whether ketchup is a smoothie.
I
Okay,
don't know
go
if that
back to
does
you.
justice to philosophy or the smoothie, frankly, but we'll get back to that. So, wisdom is using that knowledge for good ends, for good purposes. It's what to do with it. And some of the most evil, destructive regimes in the world, such as the Nazis, had plenty of information and knowledge, arguably more than most places in the world, but they didn't have much wisdom. So, looking about as I reached one of my many pivotal ages, I keep thinking this is the pivotal age, but then another one comes along, but we'll get to that. I thought, well, okay, you know, I've tried religion as a source of wisdom. And for many people, that is the source of wisdom. But for many people, that is not an adequate or satisfactory source of wisdom in our day and age. So what is there? There is psychology, neuroscience, fMRI scans of brains, and some people really like that, and we love a good study in our day and age, right? We love studies show. You can begin a phrase with studies show that, running backwards is better for your health than running forward, and people say, your first response is, "Really?" Because the studies show, so you're inclined to believe it, but okay, that's another source. But it struck me that there's a third source that is overlooked, and that is philosophy. The word philosophy from the Greek philosophia, literally means love of wisdom. And yet, when you think of philosophy, Chip, I mean, maybe let's say before you read my book or other such books, what came to mind?
Well, when you think of philosophy, you often think of something very abstract and, something that is, it's sort of something from a different era. It's like
Right. Antiquated, perhaps?
antiquated for sure.
Dusty,
Yes.
moldy.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's a shame because if you think about it, you know, definitely technology has changed and pharmacology. We would not want to turn to the ancient Greeks for lessons on pharmacology, for instance, or even medicine for that matter. But when it comes to this quest for wisdom, they have a lot to teach us because humans are still humans. And the questions of happiness, of fulfillment in life have not changed one iota. And I mean that literally. They have not changed at all. And it's a shame that philosophy gets such a bum rap as being sort of, like calculus with words or something like that, something that gives you a headache. And Steve Martin, the comedian, he actually majored in philosophy as an undergrad. And he, for one of his early stand up routines, he talks about how, well, if you major in any other subject like geology or physics, or biology in college, the minute you graduate, you forget it all. But if you major in philosophy, you've retained just enough to screw you up for the rest of your life. The idea being that somehow studying philosophy not only will not be helpful, but you'll become so confused. You'll be sitting there wondering whether a ketchup really is a smoothie or whatever that you won't be able to, get out of bed in the morning. And really, the opposite is true. There have been bad philosophers, just like there have been bad musicians and bad prime ministers and everything else, but we focus on the good ones. And in fact, there's a resurgence, particularly in Stoicism. That we can talk about why, but there's Stoicism is hot. But my book is about more than Stoicism. I mean, I look at each of these 14 philosophers traveling again to usually where they lived, died, worked, and thought, and just applying a very simple how-to question to their life. For instance, how to wonder, like Socrates. Socrates slash Plato, they were the same person in many ways, said all philosophy begins with wonder. How to see, like Thoreau, like everyday Thoreau. How to be kind, like Confucius, not only Western philosophy. Really simple things like how to get out of bed, like Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher. So, with this approach, I'm not looking at the metaphysics of it, that factors in some ways, but really wisdom. If philosophy is not gonna make you a better person, what's the point? You could say that about religion as well, but this is a book about philosophy.
I wanna quote you, in the book. I wrote a blog post about your book, and I'll start with just the preface to this paragraph, which is my words, and then I'll make it clear when it's your words. "Given the times we live in, it's easy to feel the weight of the world, not the wonder of the world. But this book reacquainted me with the value of wonder, with no intention other than just being in a state of wonder." Eric writes, "We often conflate wonder with curiosity. Yes, both provide helpful antidotes to apathy, but in different ways. Wonder is personal in a way curiosity is not. You can be curious dispassionately. You can question dispassionately. You cannot wonder dispassionately. Curiosity is restive, always threatening to chase the next shiny object that pops into view. Not wonder. Wonder lingers. Wonder is curiosity reclined. Feet up, drink in hand. Wonder never chased a shiny object. Wonder never killed a cat."
It's true, and I stand by those words, and I think we should have, you should maybe open an ancillary school of wonder, to go along with MEA because, it's underappreciated, and again, Plato, through the mouthpiece of Socrates, says all philosophy begins with wonder. I wonder what happens if you do this. I wonder why. I wonder how. I mean, it's a very open ended question. And it may lead to some Ben Franklin style usefulness, but it may just lead to a jam session under the stars in Santa Fe. And this idea that we live in an overly results oriented society, I think. And I hope I'm not getting off track here, but I got to get this out. Is I feel that it's one reason that the glaring blind spot with AI, particularly in my field with writing, is, "Oh, I can ask AI to write this essay." Okay, so you're results oriented. You're assuming there's no benefit in doing it yourself. You know, why not have AI do the running for you? Why not have AI athletes compete with each other? Nobody
Why
would
don't you
watch that.
have AI make love to your wife?
There
Well, okay.
there you go. Or yeah. So, um, the process can be as valuable as the result. And there's a wonderful lesson embedded in the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu holy book, where, well, holy book, it's a poem. It's a relatively short poem. And Lord Krishna, disguised as a charioteer, is speaking to Arjun, an warrior. And Arjun's about to go into battle and he's scared. And Lord Krishna says in so many words, Arjun, put 100% effort into what you're doing, but have precisely 0% invested in the results. And this is something I keep coming back to myself, and it's really hard to do. You put 100% effort into writing that book, but you have 0% invested in how it does on the bestseller list or how its sales are. You start something called MEA, you put your whole heart into it, but you have 0% invested in the results. Really hard to do. But I do think it's one of the keys to happiness and fulfillment is getting out of the expectations game, and wonder is not about expectations. It is one of those emotions that is its own reward.
What kind of path are you carving through midlife? Our free Midlife Pathfinder quiz helps you discover which of 8 archetypes best describe your approach to this stage of life and what that means for your next chapter. It only takes a few minutes and your results may surprise you. Find out your archetype now. It's quick, it's fun, and it might help you see your journey in a whole new light. Take the Pathfinder quiz at meawisdom.com/quiz. It seems to me that in an era of AI where the moral code and ethics and deeper imagination are increasingly more valuable because these are not things that AI can currently do. It feels like philosophy may be making a comeback. I mean, they're certainly. Why do you think the Stoics have become so popular with Ryan Holiday's podcast and his books and all kinds of other people quoting, Marcus Aurelius? I just literally this afternoon interviewed Gavin Newsom for the podcast, and he was quoting Marcus Aurelius and Marcus Aurelius and Meditations.
A couple reasons. One, superficial reason is that these were manly men. These were these were masculine guys who
We're living in a manly men era, aren't we?
is the manly men. Yes, Marcus Aurelius was an emperor, and people get to scratch that ancient Greek and Roman itch, but that's just the superficial reason. The deeper reason is that I want to give you Stoicism in a nutshell, and you may have seen it on a T-shirt, but it started with the Stoics, which is there's much more in life than you know that you don't control, and you need to let go of all that stuff you don't control. But there's this one thing in life that you do control that you're not paying attention to, which is your internal compass, your internal reactions to events. So the Stoics lived during particularly uncertain times in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and we are living in particularly uncertain times. And so I think that is the appeal. Here is a philosophy that says focus not on events, but your reactions to events. And hey, that's the one thing you can always control. They can throw you into the Hanoi Hilton in during the Vietnam War and take away your freedoms and your dignity, but they can't take away how you're reacting to the situation. That you own. That is essentially Stoicism. I mean, books and books and libraries have been written on it, but I think that is the essence of it, and I think we find that appealing, don't you think? Because so much seems out of our control. You
Yeah.
watch the news every day, and it's just one horrific thing after another, and then here comes a philosopher or philosophy saying, "Okay, you can control your actions, how you react to events on the ground, but you can't control everything. You're not president. You're not prime minister. You can control your internal reaction, how you choose to react to it. And that's very powerful and very appealing to people.
Which of these 14 philosophies, or specifically the philosophers, did you most resonate with?
I'm going to answer with a couple. Okay, two. Okay, give me two. All right. Yeah, Montaigne, Michel de Montaigne is because he was an accidental philosopher like me. He was in the 1500s living in Bordeaux in France. In fact, he was mayor of Bordeaux and he was successful. Maybe this sounds familiar. He wasn't an early employee of Airbnb, but he was a mayor of Bordeaux and he had a health crisis and various crises. And he decided at a young age, relatively young age, to get out of the rat race. And he withdraws to Santa Fe. No, just kidding. He withdraws to I'm trying to insert you into the he withdraws to his tower, and I went to visit the tower. It's in Saint-Emilion, outside of Bordeaux. You can still see the tower. It's pretty cool. You walk up there, and he lost a friend who may have been his lover at a young age, and he's in mourning as well. And he goes up the tower, and he brings 1,000 books with him, and he just sits there and reads. And he's got all these inscriptions in Latin and in French too, Old Middle French, and his motto is, "What do I know?" You know? So he is in a way playing my role, and he writes in his essays about everything. He writes about death very profoundly, but he writes about thumbs and he writes about cannibals and he writes about flatulence, I mean, life. And so there's no topic he won't approach, and he approaches it with some humor and with an open mind. He doesn't have a philosophy. There's no real like body of thought that you can do your master's thesis on, but he has a philosophical mind. And and so he would be one. And the other, oh boy, well, I love Gandhi, but then again, we talked about how I love India. I'm gonna go with Henry David Thoreau for a reason, which is, do you believe in changing your mind?
Of course.
Okay, good. So authors can fall into this trap where you structure your book and you set out to fill in the blanks and nothing you don't want to find anything out that will cause you to have to make an abrupt shift, because time and money and yeah. So I went to Concord, Massachusetts, where Thoreau spent most of his life, convinced that my chapter is going to be, how to live simply, like Henry David Thoreau, who famously went to Walden Pond, lived in a cabin, simply and alone, you know, and there's more to the story than that. But that's basically, he did an experiment like that for a year or two.
I think he'd go, yeah, he went to have breakfast with his mother every day or
Well,
something like that.
it's an exaggeration, but it was 20 minutes from town and he would go and drop off his laundry with his mom and pick up some baked cake. But still, it was let's get past that because I don't wanna piss all over him because he's pretty upfront that, he has a chapter in Walden called The Neighbors. So, he's upfront about that. So I'm very careful not to tear everyone down because you catch a whiff of hypocrisy. So I soon learned, though, that he wasn't about how to live simply or how to live alone. He was about how to see. When you read his diary in particular, it's 10 million words. I read a lot of those words. It's about how to see clearly. So he's not didn't travel the world. He hardly ever left Concord, Massachusetts, but his observations are so rich. And he would observe the same scene from different angles, from morning, at night, winter, and summer, and from different perspectives. He even would observe Walden Pond inverted. He would bend over, put his head between his legs, and look at the pond upside down. And I go to Walden Pond myself. This is the guinea pig in me. And I repeat Thoreau's experiment. And all the blood rushes to my head, and I nearly pass out. And I say, okay, this is not working. But that idea of changing your perspective is, in fact, and not by a lot, you see more, it's a thread throughout philosophy. In fact, the Stoics like Epictetus talk about basically reframing the narrative. You're stuck in traffic, he says, or their version of traffic, a big crowd, and they're annoying you with their noise. Tell yourself it's a festival. You're in the middle of a festival now.
I'll try that next time I'm on the 405 in LA in
there
traffic.
you go.
It's a
It's a
festival.
party. It's a festival of
It
cars and people.
Yes,
But so
and they're
much
all
of
flipping me off. I'm sorry.
there you go.
That
They're waving
that's the
to me.
handshake. That's the
It
handshake. Okay.
is.
Okay. All
But
right.
I mean,
Okay.
first of all, I'm a big believer in a little self-deception. I
Yeah.
really am. Okay.
Listen, I love
So, yeah.
festivals.
Okay.
But I wanna actually there's a quote from your book about Thoreau that I just wanna read here because I think it captures what you're saying. You say, you wrote, "I love the way Thoreau sounds less like a philosopher and more like an awestruck teen."
Yeah. He is just spending like 8 hours watching, this turtle who moves slowly, or these ducks, or just watching the pond, and he would get all excited about mainly natural phenomena, and, he was, Ralph Waldo Emerson was a friend of his, said, "He is a boy, and when he gets older, he'll be a grown boy," basically. I'm paraphrasing that, but that's the gist of it. That idea that he never fully grew up. And that, no one, I think, is born without a sense of wonder. I think we're all born with it, and it tends to get beaten out of us, and by age it's pretty early. By age 10 or 12, a lot of it's been beaten out of us. So a lot of, I think it's the role of a philosopher to incorporate some of that into their lives and to be, as I say, a 7-year-old with a bigger brain. You don't wanna be a 7-year-old forever. I think you could over romanticize that childlike view of the world, but you want to be the 7-year-old with a bigger brain, with a bigger view of things, but to retain that sense of wonder.
So I have 2 last questions, but one of they're both big questions. The first one relates to that, and why is philosophy so valuable in midlife? And this really relates to the workshop we're gonna be doing April 9th through the 12th in Santa Fe. It's a weekend workshop and really focused on wisdom. How do you incorporate philosophy in your life in a way that actually allows you to create the art of living, which is really what wisdom and philosophy are all about?
I'll answer that question with one sentence, and it's the epigraph from my book, The Socrates Express, in fact, from a little-known French philosopher. He said, "Sooner or later, life makes philosophers of us all." And I think that's true. At some point in life, you're gonna really wonder about what matters and what doesn't, and what mark you wanna leave, and what is important to you, and why. And, Nietzsche said a man or woman can endure any what if they have a why, and I think that's true. And, ideally, and you see this with great poets and great thinkers, is they have this sort of crisis of meaning earlier in their life, so they're able to produce a lot for a longer period of time, but better late than never. So if sooner or later life makes philosophers of us all, like, what are you waiting for, is my attitude. And it is, I think, also one of the blessings of early-ish success, and I'll include maybe some financial success in that, or career success, is if you achieve that at, say, 40 as opposed to 70 or 65, you're able to realize earlier on, "Oh, it's not what it's all about. This is nice, but, no, I thought it was money, it's not. I thought it was the corner office, it's not." And if you don't get the money in the corner office until you're 70, you'll be like, "Oh, shit. I've been chasing the wrong thing." So there's some advantages to that. Crisis, like people like Montaigne. In fact, I'm looking through the list of philosophers I write about, and none of them were particularly well-adjusted people. I've got to be honest. They all had their issues, and they were grumps. Some of them were malcontents. Some of them had hedonistic streaks. Gandhi had a lot of weird ideas. I mean, so we're not worshiping saints here. We're sharing the ideas, delving into the ideas of people like us who thought a lot about what are basically the three big questions of life, which I feel that science and technology can't answer. Number 1 is where do I come from? Number 2 is what happens after I die? And number 3 is what should I do in the meantime? And I'm really focused on number 3. 1 and 3, number 2. Whoops, number 2. What do we do in the meantime? 1 and 3 are metaphysics. Where do we come from? What happens when we die? But what should we do? Science and technology are very good at telling us how to do things. ChatGPT can tell you how to make a spreadsheet, how to start a company even, but why should you start the Modern Elder Academy? Well, why do it? So, yeah, and that's it.
Last question. If a young buck came along and said, "Eric, I wanna have some coffee or tea with you next week, and I'd love to tap into your wisdom," and think about a wisdom bumper sticker, that you might bring to our lunch. I mean, not a physical one, but just something in your head. What's the wisdom bumper sticker that has Eric's fingerprints all over it? And what's the origin story or the school of hard knocks that led you to it?
This one is, as far as I know, an actual Eric original, and it's very simple. When in doubt, be generous, and I think that has served me well. And I realize in our day and age of tipping, when you go to buy your $4 cup of coffee, there and it's like, "Do you wanna leave a tip?" And you're thinking about it, and you're doing the damn math, when in doubt, be generous. I think we live in an age where we're afraid to be a sucker, you know? People ask you for help. I'm sure they ask you for help. There are scams out there, and we can become overly protective. But there is a price to pay from being the person who can proudly say, "I've never been scammed once," and that is you've never given once, right? So, all things being equal, when in doubt and you're in a situation, be generous. What's the most generous course of action I can take here? And can I give you a bonus bumper
Yeah,
sticker?
go for it.
Okay, I know we don't have much time.
You're being
Um,
generous.
yeah, okay. When in doubt, be generous. This one I picked up in my travels in Thailand, and that is the relationship is more important than the problem. The relationship is more important than the problem. And I often invoke this one when I'm in a fight with someone, we're arguing, and I feel I'm right and they're wrong. Okay, what do we do with that? The relationship is more important than the problem. Oftentimes, and sometimes the problem's more important, but very rarely. If you're in a fight with one of your employees or, God forbid, one of your guest faculty, if that ever happens, the relationship is more important than the problem. And we in the US, we're very fixated on truth, being right. But in the East in particular, I met a man named Karma once, and I think that's the title of something, but I met a man named Karma in Bhutan, and he said to me, he said, "Eric, happiness is not personal. I don't know what you Americans are talking about personal happiness. It's 100% relational." And we could talk for an hour about that, but the relationship's more important than the problem.
When you're here in Santa Fe, we're gonna be able to talk about this stuff for hours, and I think there'll be coffee and tea and food and, like, a spectacular experience, and, what I love
Because
about
all philosophy begins with coffee. Plato actually said that also. It's a little known quote from him. Yeah.
what I know is that I could talk with you for hours. So this was really enjoyable. It's a little peek into what our wisdom weekend will be like, our philosophy weekend in early April, and people can sign up for that. And thank you, thank you for being generous.
I think our relationship is more important than the problem. So there you go. It's been a pleasure. You ask great questions. You have a sense of wonder, even at your age. So there
Even
you
at my
go.
age, I know.
There you go.
Okay,
See you in Santa Fe, Chip. It's been a pleasure.
thank you, Eric.
Take care. Bye bye.
Sooner or later, life makes a philosopher of all of us. I like that. That makes sense. It's often in midlife. It's in midlife when we're trying to make sense of our life. Midlife is whether it's external circumstances or internal, just sort of angst. It's a time of life when we are sort of saying, wow, what got me here is not going to get me there. And what I don't want to continue to live the way I've been living. And so philosophy and wisdom are really valuable in midlife as a result. There are a whole bunch. I mean, honestly, I wrote a lot of notes during this episode because he kept saying interesting things, everything from calculus, philosophy is calculus with words. I like that. I'd never liked calculus, or the idea of a soul place, or a possibilian, like someone who has a lot of possibility in their life. But if I had to pick 3 particular lessons from Eric, the first one is clearly what he said that really defines philosophy, which is the idea of the 3 questions of life. Where do I come from? What happens when I'm here? And what should I do in the middle? And what happens when I die? So, where do I come from? What happens while I'm here? And what happens when I die? And he says he focuses on that second one, and philosophy focuses on the second one. It's less focused on where did I come from? That might be psychology. It's less focused on where do I go to? That might be religion. But what we're doing in between is the domain of philosophy. Secondly, I just liked the fact that he said, as we get older, it's about being useful. And he's like quoting me because I've said before, as we get older, it's not about being youthful, it's about being useful and being useful for its own sake, for the sake of just being helpful in the world. That is part of what philosophy is as well. That's part of what Socrates did, with the young people, and part of the reason they put him to death was because of the fact that he was having too much influence. Similarly with Rumi, Rumi is not one of the philosophers, I don't think, in the Socrates Express. I don't recall it being there. But Rumi's philosopher friend, Shams, who was a few years older than him, was put to death because he was having an undue influence on Rumi, the religious scholar. And when Shams left, Rumi became a whirling dervish, and actually that's how he reconnected with Shams, his muse. The idea of being useful, especially to younger people, is really what philosophy and wisdom is all about. I define wisdom as a metabolized experience mindfully shared for the common good. And so that is really what I think he's talking about. And I think the last thing I would just say is the idea, when he was talking about the places of genius, the creative genius had 3 Ds: diversity, discernment, and disorder. The ability to actually have a diverse collection of minds coming together and then having a discerning wisdom filter. He called it the colander. And then the idea of disorder, Pleasantville is not going to be not going to be full of creativity. So it needs those 3 things. I think that that's something I'm going to keep in mind as I think about the places I love in the world. Do they have those kinds of things? And I mean, there's just so much else I could actually say. When in doubt, be generous. All I know, tricking people into being better versions of themselves. That's what philosophy is meant to be. This man is full of it. He's full of it, full of philosophy and full of interesting ideas. And I got to tell you, I think this is going to be a spectacular workshop. So I hope to see you in Santa Fe, April 9th through the 12th in Santa Fe. Hope to see you there.
Thanks for listening to the Midlife Chrysalis. This show is produced by Midlife Media. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform.